Today I want to talk about the very beginning of Dante's Inferno. That's the first part of Dante's three-part Divine Comedy. But let me begin by reflecting on something I mentioned earlier, which is the idea of Dante being an exile politically from Florence. But this also causes Dante to think about the issue of exile in a much deeper way. We are, after all, in some sense, exiles in the world. And part of what it means to be a Christian is to feel a little bit of a sense that I don't entirely belong here. In a sense, you could say we are eternals who are now in a temporary pilgrimage, if you will, with human bodies here on earth. I remember Cardinal Dolan, the Cardinal of New York, was once told a story about visiting a Dominican friar, and when he went to his room, he noticed there was like nothing in the room. And he asked the friar, like, where's the rest of your stuff? And the friar goes, well, I don't have any other stuff. This is all I got. And then the friar says to Cardinal Dolan, he goes, well, you only have a small suitcase. And Cardinal Dolan goes, well, yeah, but I'm just passing through. And the friar goes, well, aren't we all? Aren't we all? So this is a very Dante-esque sentiment, to be able to see the world and our life from different angles. And this is part of the beauty of the Divine Comedy is it's not just that we see hell and purgatory and heaven, but we see Dante in those places looking back, you may say, at us. Now, here's an interesting question to ask about hell. Who goes to hell? And you might say, what do you have to be to go to hell? What do you have to do? And I think most people would answer, well, you have to be, a sinner. You have to be a bad guy. You have to have done some really bad stuff. And that, as it turns out, is the wrong answer. Why? Because all human beings are sinners. If hell is full of sinners, and it sure is, purgatory is full of sinners. Heaven is full of people who sinned in their lives, and some really spectacular sinners are, as it turns out, in heaven. So being a sinner is actually not the line of demarcation that decides who goes to hell and who doesn't. The real answer is that you have to be an unrepentant sinner. That is the key phrase, unrepentant. And we will see as we go through hell, and we're going to make some kind of stops along the way, who are these unrepentant sinners, and what does it mean to be unrepentant? Part of what Dante thinks about is, what does sin do to you? And if you don't give it up, so to speak, if you don't acknowledge it, if you don't appeal to grace, then sin forms who you are. It forms your character. One of the most ingenious things about Dante's hell is we can't think of Dante's hell as, we're going to go to deeper and deeper circles, and Dante is going to be, he's going to be putting his imagination to work. He's going to come up with unbelievably ingenious tortures and punishments. Not at all. Part of the sort of profundity of the Inferno is that Dante asks of the sinner, what is it that you truly want? What is your real objective? And then your punishment, if you can call it that, is he gives it to you. One of the things you see about sinners is they are punished in a manner that directly corresponds to what they were after. They, in a sense, get what they wanted, except that what they wanted turns out not to be what they thought it was. Or to put it somewhat differently, all sin has some kind of a veneer. It has some kind of surface appeal. Think about it. If it didn't have that, why would you do it? So sin does promise you something wonderful, but the sin itself is not wonderful. The sin itself is actually ugly and disgusting, but nevertheless, it's what you want. And Dante basically goes, in hell, you can have it. You actually have it, but without the surface veneer, with the surface veneer removed. And as we look at the architecture of Dante's hell, we see that there are 9 sort of circles of hell, but there are 3 categories of hell, 3 sort of levels, if you may. And each level has circles within it. So the 3 levels are, I'm going to call them concupiscence or incontinence, loosely speaking, lack of self-control. That's the upper circles. Then we go to violence, and then we go to fraud. And as we go deeper into hell, the sins become more serious. So right away, Dante does not take the view that sort of all sins are equal and that, a small thing that you didn't help a guy who needed, $5 is the same thing as you cheated on your wife or you murdered some guy. No, for Dante, sins have levels of gravity. And levels of gravity require different levels of punishment. And so Dante's hell is, well, you'd have to say hierarchical. It's an inverse hierarchy in which the deeper down you go, the worse things begin. The worse things get. Now, let's just begin by reading the first couple of lines of the poem. Midway along the journey of our life, I woke to find myself in a dark wood, for I had wandered off from the straight path. So here's Dante, beginning in a very interesting way. He's in the middle of his life. He's 35 years old, and the year is 1300 AD. And what Dante is saying is that he wandered off from the straight path. And he's giving you right there the idea of what sin is. It's wandering off of the path that you may say God has laid out for us. So sin isn't, I did this and I did that. We'll come across a lot of specific sins in hell. But Dante's original kind of confusion, the fact that he's in this so-called dark wood, is not due to any particular thing that he's done. In fact, he never says what that is. You almost get the idea that he's going through some kind of, I won't call it a midlife crisis, but some kind of a spiritual crisis. And Dante thinks he's going to get himself out. And so he's like in this dark wood. In fact, he goes on to say, very interestingly, how I entered there I cannot truly say. And I think this really resonates with us because what it's saying to us is, look, sometimes you end up in a place in life and you're like, how'd I get here? In other words, I didn't mean to get here. I didn't want to become this kind of person, but somehow I have, and I now have to face up to it. And so here's Dante. He's sort of taking stock of himself, and he's trying to get out of this dark wood. He sees the sun momentarily, and he goes, I'll climb out of it. He says, but, I had to drag my bad leg. So you see this idea of Dante the poet. Let's remember always, we have two Dantes here. We have Dante the Pilgrim, who's the character invented by Dante the poet. Dante the poet is writing the poem, and in the poem, you've got a 35-year-old guy named Dante who's undergoing this journey. And while Dante himself, the pilgrim, is somebody who's going to be disoriented, he's going to be making mistakes, he actually doesn't, a lot of times he gets things wrong. We should never think this of Dante the poet. Dante the poet is the older Dante who is writing the poem, and writing the poem, you might say, as someone who has already gone through this journey. So here's Dante, he's in the dark wood, he's all confused, he sees the sun, he's trying to climb out of it, and then his path is blocked by three animals, one by one. They come one by one and they block. So one comes over here, he goes, let me go over there. And the three animals are a leopard, a lion, and a wolf. And scholars over the years have sort of debated who's the leopard, who's the lion, who's the wolf, and they've tried to identify particular sins with these animals that perhaps Dante is, symbolically confessing to. But no, in reality, I think that these animals represent the three big categories of sin. So the leopard, with its spots and its kind of, Dante even uses the word gaudy, the gaudy leopard. The gaudy leopard represents concupiscence. Concupiscence is desire, it's lust, it's incontinence. The lion represents violence. And the wolf, the third, by the way, in Italian, all these names begin with L, and there's a kind of melody. The leopard, the lion, and the wolf. The wolf represents fraud. So here's Dante. He's in this thicket. He's in this confusion. He doesn't know how to get out. He's blocked by, you can say, the overpowering force of sin. And just as he's about to despair, somebody shows up. And that somebody will be a figure already dead, long dead, named Virgil, a great poet, author of the poet of the Aeneid, an epic poem that in some ways is a rival to the Divine Comedy, but also one of Dante's heroes in life. Dante admired Virgil, he copied Virgil's style, he learned from Virgil. He saw Virgil also to some degree as a competitor. And here is that very Virgil, long dead, now showing up as a shade, as a ghost, showing up to Dante in this moment of confusion and saying, listen, I'm here on a mission. I'm sort of heaven sent. We'll talk about what that means. And Virgil goes, I am here to take you on a journey, but you're not going to go up. There's no way to get out of here by going up. We got to go down. Down where? Down into the earth, down into hell. And only by going down can we find our way eventually upward.